In the vast emptiness of Texas, some secrets don't stay buried. When a savage terror grips Brazos Creek City, the only hope lies with a man who ran from the world. But can he outrun the beast that hunts the night? The Texas sun beat down on the cracked earth, relentless and unforgiving. The kind of heat that bleached the color from the sky and baked the silence into the land itself. Out here, miles from anything resembling a town, silence wasn't just the absence of noise. It was a presence, thick and heavy as the humid air. Clayton Clay Brody existed within that silence, had cultivated it around his small, weathered ranch house like a defensive wall. Dust devils danced across the parched yard, swirling patterns in the fine beige powder that coated everything. The warped porch railings, the rusting water tank, the man himself. Clay sat on the top step of his porch, methodically disassembling his rifle, a heavy caliber bolt action that looked as worn and functional as he did. His movements were economical, precise, honed by years of practice that predated even this self-imposed exile. Each click of metal, each slide of oiled steel was a familiar punctuation mark in the vast quiet. His hands, rough and calloused, knew every groove and pin, every point of potential failure. He worked deliberately, eyes narrowed against the glare, his face a landscape of hard lines and sun-weathered skin partially shaded by the brim of a faded cap. Mid-40s, maybe older, the kind of age that wasn't measured in years, but in miles traveled and things seen. He paused, lifting his head slightly, his gaze sweeping the empty horizon. Nothing but shimmering heat haze, the distant jagged line of scrub-covered hills, and the endless blue above. A hawk circled lazily, a dark speck against the pale canvas. Clay watched it for a moment, his expression unreadable, before returning to his task. This was his routine. Check the fences that mark the edge of his small property, more a suggestion than a barrier. Check the well pump, clean the tools, the weapons. Exist. Wait for the sun to dip below the horizon and paint the sky in bruised purples and fiery oranges, only to rise again and start the cycle anew. Inside the small house, it was dim and sparsely furnished. A simple cot, a sturdy table, a couple of chairs, a wood-burning stove for the colder months. Everything had its place, neat and utilitarian. No pictures adorned the walls, no personal trinkets cluttered the surfaces. It was the living space of a man who didn't expect company, who didn't court memories. Yet, sometimes, the silence wasn't empty. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night or the dead heat of the afternoon, fragments would surface unbidden. The frantic shouts, the flash of gunfire in dense jungle, the chilling snap of bone, the low growl that wasn't quite animal. He'd pushed them back down, burying them under the weight of the present, the immediate task at hand. Oiling the bolt, checking the sight alignment, focusing on the tangible. He finished cleaning the rifle, reassembling it with the same quiet competence. He worked around into the chamber, then ejected it smoothly, testing the action. Satisfied, he leaned the weapon against the porch railing within easy reach. His eyes scanned the perimeter again, a habit ingrained so deep it was almost unconscious. Years in the ranges had taught him vigilance, taught him that threats often came from the periphery, from the places you weren't looking. But out here, the threats were mundane. Drought, coyotes bothering the scarce local wildlife, the occasional rattlesnake seeking shade under the porch. He preferred those threats. They were predictable, understandable, natural. The sun was beginning its slow descent, softening the harsh light, lengthening the shadows. The heat, though still immense, lost some of its biting edge. Clay stood up, stretching his back, the movement stiff. He walked to the edge of the porch, boots kicking up small puffs of dust. He wasn't waiting for anything in particular, just marking the transition from day to evening. Another day survived. Another day kept the past at bay. Then, a sound. Faint at first, almost lost in the low hum of insects that emerged as the day cooled. A low rumble, growing steadily louder, distinct from the wind or the distant lowing of a stray cow. Clay's body tensed instantly, his relaxed posture snapping into sharp attention. His hand drifted towards the rifle, fingers brushing the cool steel of the barrel. He squinted towards the dirt track that served as his driveway, a barely visible scar snaking through the mesquite and prickly pear. The sound was an engine getting closer, a vehicle. Visitors were rare to the point of being non-existent. Uninvited visitors were unwelcome. His mind, trained for threat assessment, cycled through possibilities, none of them good. Trouble didn't usually drive this far out, unless it was specifically looking for you. And Clay had spent years making sure nobody came looking. The low rumble grew, resolving into the distinct sound of tires crunching over gravel and dry earth. Dust plumed in the distance, catching the slanted rays of the setting sun. It was definitely heading straight for his ranch. The quiet was broken. The vehicle, a dusty county sheriff's SUV, pulled to a stop 20 yards from the porch, engine idling for a moment before cutting out, plunging the immediate area back into a silence that now felt charged, expectant. Clay remained motionless on the porch, his hand resting lightly on the rifle beside him, watching as the driver's side door opened. A man climbed out, moving with the weary stiffness of someone burdened by more than just the heat. He wore a tan sheriff's uniform, darkened with sweat stains under the arms and across the back. A badge glinted dully on his chest. He took off his hat, wiping a forearm across his brow, revealing thinning grey hair and a face etched with lines of fatigue and worry. Clay recognized him, though it had been years. Dale Miller, sheriff of Brazos Creek County. He looked older, heavier, and profoundly tired. Miller squinted towards the porch, his gaze lingering on the rifle before settling on Clay. "Brody?" he called out, his voice raspy. "Figured this had to be the place. Took damn near half the day to find it." Clay didn't relax his stance. "Sheriff?" he acknowledged, his tone flat, unwelcoming. "Long way from Brazos Creek City." Miller nodded slowly, trudging closer, his boots crunching on the parched ground. He stopped at the foot of the steps, looking up at Clay. "It is," he agreed. "Wouldn't be out here if it wasn't important. Damn important." Clay just watched him, waiting. He wasn't going to make this easy. This intrusion felt like a violation of an unspoken treaty he'd made with the world. "We got problems, Clay," Miller said, lowering his voice slightly, as if afraid the empty landscape itself might overhear. "Bad ones, the kind nobody knows how to handle. Problems are part of life, Sheriff. Usually helps to keep them in your own jurisdiction." Clay's words were blunt, meant to deter. Miller sighed, the sound heavy with exhaustion. "Wish I could. Lord, I wish I could. But this ain't normal." He leaned against the porch railing, looking genuinely unsteady. "We've had attacks. 4 of them now, in the last 2 weeks. Inside city limits, Clay. Not coyotes, not mountain lions, something else." Clay remained impassive, though a flicker of something, recognition, apprehension, might have crossed his eyes for the briefest instant. Animals get desperate. Drought pushes them into town. Desperate animals don't do this, Miller insisted, shaking his head. He reached into his SUV and pulled out a thick manila envelope, walking back to the steps. His hand trembled slightly as he opened it. "Look." He didn't hand the envelope over, just showed Clay the top photo. It was mostly shadow and blur, but depicted carnage, something dark and indistinct, hunched over something mangled. Clay looked away quickly, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Miller didn't press him with that one, instead pulling out another item, a plaster cast. It was huge, easily twice the size of any known canine print, with deep claw marks gouged into the surface. "Found this near the 3rd site," Miller said, his voice low. "Parks Department guy poured the plaster. Never seen anything like it. State wildlife biologist looked at it, just scratched his head. Said maybe a bear, but..." He trailed off. Bears weren't common in this part of Texas, and they certainly didn't attack people in alleys behind diners. Clay stared at the cast, his gaze intense now. The silence stretched, filled only by the buzz of insects and the faint whisper of the wind. "Folks are scared, Clay," Miller continued, his voice regaining some strength, fueled by desperation. "Boarding up windows, talking about vigilantes. The mayor's breathing down my neck. We're losing control." He looked directly at Clay. "Heard stories about you, back when you were... before. Heard you dealt with things that weren't supposed to exist." Clay finally spoke, his voice gravelly. "Stories get twisted, Sheriff. I was military. Did my time. Now I'm just trying to be left alone." He turned his gaze back to the horizon, a clear dismissal. "This isn't my fight anymore." Miller slumped slightly, disappointment washing over his features. He seemed about to argue, then hesitated. He looked down at the file in his hands, then back at Clay's rigid profile. "All right," he said quietly. "All right, Clay. Maybe you're right." He paused, then added, almost as an afterthought, his voice laced with a weariness that went bone deep. "Just the way it happened. The last one. Happened down by the old Red River cannery, edge of town. Tore right through the chain-link fence like it was paper." Clay froze. His head snapped back towards Miller, his eyes suddenly sharp, focused. The Red River cannery. The mention of that specific location, combined with the described method of entry, tearing through metal, struck a chord, sharp and discordant, deep within him. It wasn't just a random detail, it was a chilling echo from a past he fought daily to keep buried. A memory surfaced, rain-slicked metal, the same impossible sound of tearing steel, and a low guttural snarl that haunted his nightmares. Miller saw the change in Clay's demeanor, the sudden electric tension in his stillness. He didn't push, didn't add anything more. He just waited, letting the significance of his words hang heavy in the oppressive evening air. The silence returned, but this time it felt different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with the weight of Clay's unspoken history and the sheriff's desperate hope. The setting sun cast long, distorted shadows across the yard, painting the dust in hues of orange and blood red. Clay stood rigid on the porch, his gaze fixed on Sheriff Miller, but his mind was miles and years away, caught in the chilling grip of memory. The Red River Cannery, the torn fence. It wasn't just similar. It felt like a signature, a grotesque calling card from a past he thought long buried. He could almost smell the damp concrete, the metallic tang of fear and blood hanging in the humid night air. He forced the memory back, shoving it down with practiced effort. But the unease lingered, cold and sharp. This wasn't just some random beast driven mad by hunger. There was a pattern here, maybe even intent, and it resonated with something dark he knew intimately. He hated that feeling, hated the pull of that old life, the cold certainty settling in his gut. Sheriff Miller watched him, hope warring with weariness on his face. He didn't speak, didn't need to. He'd said the right or wrong thing. Clay finally broke the silence, his voice low and rough, stripped of its earlier dismissiveness. "Get back in your truck, Sheriff." Miller blinked. "What?" "Go back to Brazos Creek," Clay repeated, turning away from the railing and heading towards the door of his small house. "Tell your mayor, tell whoever needs telling, that I'll look into it. No promises, just I'll look." A wave of relief washed over Miller's face, so profound it seemed to take years off his appearance. "Clay, I thank you. Anything you need, resources, backup. I work alone." Clay cut him off curtly, pausing at the doorway. "Just keep your people back. Keep the scene clear if anything else happens, and keep this quiet. Panic makes people stupid, and stupid gets folks killed." Miller nodded quickly. "Understood. Anything. Just find it, Clay. Stop it." Clay gave a short, non-committal nod and disappeared inside the dim house, pulling the door shut behind him with quiet finality. Miller stood there for another moment, watching the closed door, before slowly turning and walking back to his SUV, the weight on his shoulders seeming just a little lighter. The engine rumbled to life, and the vehicle carefully turned around, heading back down the dusty track, its taillights shrinking into the twilight until they vanished completely. Silence returned to the ranch, but the quality of it had changed again. It was no longer the silence of isolation, but the tense quiet before action. Inside, Clay moved with purpose. He lit a single kerosene lamp, casting flickering shadows on the bare walls. He went to a heavy wooden footlocker tucked away in a corner, a chest he hadn't opened in years. The hinges groaned in protest as he lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in worn foam padding, lay the tools of a trade he had tried to abandon. Not just standard hunting gear, but specialized equipment. He pulled out a heavier rifle case, distinct from the one on the porch. Opening it revealed a firearm that was part tactical weapon, part custom build, fitted with specific sights, a reinforced stock. Beside it lay several magazines, longer than standard. He picked one up, thumbing the cartridges. The tips weren't lead or copper, but a dull, heavy grey metal. Silver-jacketed rounds, custom-loaded, expensive and specific. He laid the rifle aside and continued rummaging. Tracking gear more advanced than simple hunting supplies. Electronic sensors, UV lights. A heavy combat knife with a strangely serrated edge and a silvery sheen along the blade. Vials of concentrated wolfsbane extract, smelling pungent and acrid even through the stoppered glass. Thick leather gauntlets reinforced with metal studs. It was the arsenal of someone who hunted nightmares, not deer. As he worked, another fragment of memory flashed. Not the cannery this time, but a frantic firefight in pouring rain, comrades falling, a shape moving impossibly fast in the darkness, claws flashing, and his own desperate shot going wide. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, knuckles white where he gripped a vial. Failure. That was the taste the past left in his mouth. That was why he'd walked away, sought the silence. But the silence hadn't healed him. It had just kept him contained. Now, the beast was back, or one like it, and it was tearing through fences near a place that echoed his failure. Coincidence, or something else? He packed methodically, selecting only what was essential, strapping the silver-edged knife to his thigh, loading the specialized rifle. He pulled on sturdy boots, a durable canvas jacket despite the lingering heat. The nights could still get cool, and protection was paramount. He slung a heavy pack over his shoulder, one last look around the sparse room, his temporary refuge. It offered no comfort now, only reminded him of the peace he was leaving behind, perhaps for good. He stepped back out onto the porch. The last sliver of the sun had disappeared, and the sky was darkening rapidly, stars beginning to prick the deep indigo canvas. He picked up the first rifle, the one he'd been cleaning earlier, always good to have a backup, and slung it over his other shoulder. He locked the flimsy door to the ranch house, though he knew it wouldn't stop anything determined. He walked towards the battered pickup truck parked near the water tank, its engine reliably noisy but tough. Throwing his gear onto the passenger seat, he climbed in, the familiar smell of dust and old vinyl filling his nostrils. The engine coughed to life with a protesting roar, headlights cutting twin beams into the encroaching darkness. Clay didn't look back at the small house, the symbol of his failed attempt at peace. He put the truck in gear, tires spitting gravel, and drove away from the silence, heading towards the fear-choked streets of Brazos Creek City, towards the echoes of his past, and towards the hunt. The drive took hours, the darkness absolute beyond the reach of Clay's headlights on the lonely county roads. Gradually, the black gave way to the faint, hazy glow of distant city lights bleeding into the night sky. As he drew closer to Brazos Creek City, the signs of unease became palpable, even from behind the wheel. Fewer cars were on the road than expected for this time of night. Gas stations looked deserted, their lights casting stark, lonely pools on empty pavement. The outskirts felt hushed, watchful. He bypassed the main highway exit, navigating through quieter industrial areas based on Miller's earlier directions, finally pulling up near the county sheriff's department. Unlike the rest of the town, this place hummed with tense activity. Extra patrol cars sat parked haphazardly, their radio chatter a low, anxious buzz leaking from open windows. Temporary floodlights illuminated the entrance, casting harsh shadows. Clay killed the engine and sat for a moment, observing. Men in uniform moved with a hurried nervousness that spoke volumes. He could feel the fear coiling in the air, thick and cloying, a stark contrast to the clean, empty silence of his ranch. This was different. This fear had teeth. He climbed out of the truck, pulling his cap lower, his heavy pack slung over one shoulder, the backup rifle discreetly angled behind it. He drew a few curious, wary glances from the deputies milling about, but no one approached him as he pushed through the main doors. The interior was buzzing with barely controlled chaos. Phones rang incessantly. Officers spoke in hushed, urgent tones. Maps were spread across desks, marked with red pins clustered ominously near the river and the industrial zones. Sheriff Miller spotted him immediately from across the room, relief briefly smoothing the deep lines on his face. He quickly intercepted Clay before anyone else could. "Brody, glad you made it," Miller said, keeping his voice low. "It's gotten worse. Another incident reported about an hour ago. Not an attack on a person, thank God, but something big tore through the fence at the old stockyards." Clay nodded curtly. Consistent. Likes fences. He scanned the room, noting the strained faces, the palpable anxiety. "Your people look spooked." "They are spooked," Miller admitted grimly. "So am I. Half the town thinks we're dealing with some kind of rogue bear escaped from a circus. The other half is whispering about, well, things like you hunt." He gestured towards a quieter corner office. "Let's talk in here." Inside the small office, Miller shut the door, muffling the station's noise. "Mayor's about ready to call in the National Guard. I've bought us maybe 24 hours. Told him I had a specialist consultant coming in." He eyed Clay's gear. "You think you can figure this out by then?" "Maybe," Clay said, non-committal. "Depends on what it is. Where was the last confirmed attack? The fatal one?" Miller pointed to a specific spot on a large city map pinned to the wall. An alley behind a diner near the riverfront. "Third victim. Happened 3 nights ago. We've kept the scene sealed best we could, but—" "Take me there now," Clay interrupted, "before anything else gets disturbed." Miller hesitated for only a second before nodding. "Right. Let's take my car. Less conspicuous than that beast you drove in." The drive through the city was eerie. Main Street was deserted, storefronts dark, many with hastily nailed boards over windows. Curfew signs were posted at intersections. The fear Clay had sensed at the station was a tangible blanket draped over the entire town. They parked a block away from the alley and walked the rest of the way, the only sound their footsteps echoing on the pavement. Yellow police tape cordoned off the narrow alleyway between the diner and a brick warehouse. A single patrol car sat nearby, its occupant looking jumpy. Miller lifted the tape, and they stepped into the narrow space. The air was stale, tinged with the smell of garbage bins and something else. Something metallic and faintly unpleasant that made the hairs on the back of Clay's neck prickle. Floodlights set up earlier cast harsh shadows, illuminating the grim scene. Dark stains marked the pavement and splattered against the grimy brick wall. Overturned trash cans lay scattered like broken toys. Clay ignored Miller, his focus absolute. He knelt, pulling a high-intensity flashlight from his pack, its beam cutting through the shadows. He didn't look at the stains directly at first. Instead, he examined the ground, the walls, the edges of the scene with meticulous care. He noted the deep scratches in the brickwork, higher than any man could reach. He saw the way a heavy metal dumpster had been dented inwards, as if struck by incredible force. He ran a gloved hand over a section of the wall, then brought the glove close to his face, sniffing cautiously. A faint, musky canine odor, overlaid with something sharp and wrong. Finally, he directed his light to the pavement near the worst of the stains. He crouched low, his eyes scanning, missing nothing. He spotted something small and dark caught in a crack near the wall drain. A tuft of coarse, dark hair, almost black, stiff like wire. Unlike any dog or coyote fur he'd ever seen. He carefully collected it in a small evidence bag. Then he saw the marks on the ground. Not footprints. The scene was too disturbed for that, but impressions. Gouges in the asphalt, too deep for boots, too regular for random debris. Claw marks, big ones. Miller watched him, shifting his weight nervously. Find anything? Clay stood up slowly, pocketing the bag. Maybe. He shone his light on the top of the brick warehouse wall bordering the alley. How high is that? 10 feet? About, Miller confirmed. Something went up it, Clay stated, pointing his beam at deep vertical scratches marring the brick face, leading upwards. Or came down it, fast. He walked back towards the entrance of the alley, his gaze sweeping the area. He was reconstructing the event, visualizing the speed, the power, the sheer unnatural violence that had occurred here. This wasn't just an animal attack. This was predatory, efficient, and terrifyingly strong. The feeling intensified, the cold certainty that he was dealing with something he recognized, something that shouldn't be here, stalking the streets of this ordinary Texas city. The hunt had truly begun. Leaving the grim alleyway behind felt like stepping out of a cold shadow. But the fear permeating Brazos Creek City clung to the night air. Clay didn't speak as they walked back to Miller's SUV, his mind already processing the clues, assembling fragments into a disturbing picture. The size, the strength, the unnatural agility suggested by the climb. It all pointed towards a Class 3 lycanthrope, maybe larger, rare, extremely dangerous, and hunting with alarming boldness within city limits. Where to next? Miller asked as they got back into the vehicle, his voice subdued. Seeing Clay work, seeing the physical evidence up close, had clearly shaken him. "Stockyards," Clay replied curtly, settling into the passenger seat, his eyes scanning the dark streets as they drove. "You said something hit the fence there tonight." "Yeah. Dispatch got a call from the night watchman. Scared him half to death. Said something huge just barreled right through the reinforced chain link like it wasn't there. Didn't seem interested in the cattle, just passed through." Clay nodded slowly. Passing through, not hunting livestock. Moving with purpose. Is there a direct line between that alley and the stockyards? Storm drains, utility tunnels, old rail lines. Miller frowned, thinking. There's a network of old storm drains that runs under parts of the city, comes out near the river. Some sections are pretty big. And yeah, an abandoned rail spur runs behind the warehouse district, heads out towards the stockyards. "Show me the drains first," Clay decided. If it was smart, it would use cover, avoid open streets. They drove towards the riverfront, parking near an access point to the storm drain system. A large concrete opening partially obscured by overgrown weeds. The air wafting out smelled damp, stagnant, unpleasant. Clay pulled a more powerful flashlight from his pack, this one equipped with a UV setting, and approached the entrance cautiously. He swept the regular beam around the opening first. Muddy tracks led into the darkness, but they were indistinct, mostly obscured by water runoff. He knelt by the edge, examining the damp earth more closely. There, faint, but definitely there. A partial print, distorted by the mud, but showing the characteristic elongated shape and deep claw impressions he now recognized. It was heading into the drainage system from the direction of the alley attack site. "It came through here," Clay stated, switching his flashlight to the UV setting. The beam cast an eerie purple glow. He played it over the ground, the concrete walls of the tunnel entrance, Under the UV light, faint traces glowed, almost invisible splashes and smears of dried fluid. Bodily fluids, likely blood or saliva, reacting to the light. He followed the faint trail, leading deeper into the gaping black mouth of the tunnel. "You're not thinking of going in there?" Miller asked, sounding apprehensive. "Have to see where it leads," Clay said, taking another step into the oppressive darkness. The sounds of the city faded, replaced by the echo of dripping water and the skittering of unseen things. The air grew heavy, thick with the smell of decay and damp earth. He moved slowly, deliberately, sweeping the UV light back and forth, following the faint glowing trail deeper into the concrete labyrinth. Miller followed reluctantly, his own flashlight beam dancing nervously. The tunnel branched occasionally, but the faint traces Clay followed led consistently along the main conduit, heading roughly towards the stockyards. After about 15 minutes of tense progress through the echoing darkness, the trail veered sharply upwards towards a rusted maintenance ladder bolted to the wall. The glowing traces continued up the rungs. Clay examined the ladder base. More partial prints in the grime. He shone the light upwards. The ladder disappeared into a circular opening above, a manhole access. He listened intently. Faint city sounds drifted down, muffled. "Comes out somewhere near the warehouse district," Clay murmured, mostly to himself. Used the drains for cover, then surfaced closer to the stockyards. He backed away from the ladder. "Let's go. No point following into the streets from down here. We'll check the stockyards fence." Back in the relative freshness of the night air, Miller breathed a sigh of relief. Never liked those tunnels. They drove the remaining distance to the sprawling, mostly deserted stockyards on the western edge of the city. Another patrol car was already there, lights flashing silently near a section of the perimeter fence. The deputy, young and wide-eyed, practically jumped when Miller and Clay approached. "Sheriff, you should see this." He led them to the damaged section. Clay didn't need to examine it closely to see the raw power involved. Heavy-gauge chain link, designed to contain 1,000-pound bulls, was ripped open. The thick metal posts bent outwards as if hit by a truck. Strands of wire were snapped clean through. "Watchman said it came out of nowhere," the deputy stammered. "Just burst through and kept going. Headed west, out towards the old rail lines." Clay walked through the gaping hole in the fence, his boots crunching on the gravel beyond. He scanned the ground with his flashlight. Here, away from the concrete and asphalt, the tracks were clearer. Huge, deep prints pressed into the softer earth, heading in a straight line towards the dark, overgrown embankment where the abandoned railway tracks lay hidden. "It's moving with purpose," Clay said, his voice grim. "Using the drains, the rail lines, staying out of sight as much as possible until it needs to break cover. It knows the area, or it learns fast." He looked west, into the darkness beyond the stockyards. "And it's heading away from the city center now." He pulled out the small bag containing the tuft of hair he'd found in the alley. He examined it again under his flashlight beam. Dark, coarse, unnatural. Proof. Tangible evidence of the nightmare-stalking Brazos Creek City. But the tracks leading away raised a new, urgent question. Where was it going now? And why? The hunt wasn't just about finding it anymore. It was about understanding its destination before it reached it. The trail led away from the ravaged stockyard fence, following the path of the abandoned railway line westward. Overgrown weeds and thorny bushes clawed at Clay's canvas jacket as he pushed through the darkness. His flashlight beam cutting a narrow path ahead. Sheriff Miller followed a few steps behind, breathing heavily, his flashlight beam supplementing Clay's. The silence here was different from the ranch, deeper, edged with the faint, distant sounds of the city they were leaving behind, and charged with the knowledge of what moved ahead of them. The tracks were clear in the softer ground along the rail bed, huge prints indicating immense weight and a long stride. Clay moved at a steady pace, his eyes constantly scanning, listening intently. He noted broken branches, displaced stones, signs of something large moving carelessly perhaps, but also quickly. It wasn't trying too hard to hide its passage now that it was clear of the main city infrastructure. After maybe 20 minutes of tracking along the disused line, the tracks veered sharply off the embankment, heading towards a dense cluster of warehouses and derelict industrial buildings looming dark against the starry sky. This area looked long abandoned, windows boarded up or broken like vacant eyes, corrugated metal siding rusted and peeling. Old processing plants mostly, Miller offered quietly, shining his light on a faded sign that read, "Brazos Valley Meats, closed. Shut down years ago. Place is a maze." Good place to hide. Or rest, Clay murmured, slowing his pace as they approached the nearest building. A long, low structure with gaping loading bays. He motioned for Miller to stay back slightly, then approached the closest bay cautiously. He swept his light inside. Empty pallets lay scattered like bones. Chains hung motionless from ceiling tracks. Dust motes danced in the beam. The air smelled of rust, decay, and something else. That faint, sharp, musky odor he'd caught in the alley. Stronger here. It was close. He took a tentative step inside, his rifle held at the ready, thumb resting near the safety. The vast space swallowed the sound of his footsteps. His light probed the deep shadows, revealing stacks of forgotten equipment shrouded in cobwebs, rusting machinery silent as tombs. He moved deeper, ears straining, every sense on high alert. Then, a sound. A low scrape, like claws on concrete, coming from deeper within the warehouse, towards the back. It was instantly followed by a heavy thud, as if something large had bumped against metal shelving. Clay froze, clicking off his flashlight. Miller, standing near the entrance, did the same. Plunged into near-total darkness, broken only by faint moonlight, filtering through grimy upper windows. Clay stood utterly still, listening. Silence. Then another scrape, closer this time, accompanied by a low guttural sound that wasn't quite a growl, more like a ragged intake of breath. He could pinpoint the direction now. Towards the left rear corner, behind a towering bank of dilapidated metal lockers, he began to move again, silent as a shadow, placing each foot carefully, his rifle tracking towards the sound. He could feel Miller's presence somewhere behind him, a tense stillness in the dark. He reached the edge of the lockers, peering cautiously around the corner. For a split second, his flashlight beam, switched back on low, illuminated it. A massive, hunched shape, covered in dark, matted fur. It was turned partly away from him, seemingly preoccupied with something on the floor. It was huge, easily 8 feet tall, even hunched over, with unnaturally long limbs and wickedly curved claws. The musky scent was overpowering. Before Clay could fully register the sight, before he could even raise his rifle properly, the creature reacted. It hadn't seen him perhaps, but it sensed him. With astonishing speed, it spun around, revealing a monstrous head, elongated muzzle filled with dagger-like teeth, eyes glowing with a faint, predatory luminescence, even in the dim light. It let out a short, explosive snarl and lunged not directly at Clay, but sideways. It slammed into a stack of heavy metal barrels near the wall, sending them crashing down with a deafening clang. The noise was clearly a diversion. In the instant Clay flinched at the sudden cacophony, the creature moved again, a dark blur vanishing through a large broken opening in the far wall, disappearing into the darkness outside. Clay cursed under his breath, rushing forward, Miller scrambling behind him. They reached the opening, a jagged hole leading out into another overgrown alley between warehouses. Clay swept his light across the ground. Fresh tracks led away, but already fading into the rubble. It was gone. Damn it, Miller breathed, adrenaline making his voice shake. Did you see the size of that thing? Clay didn't answer immediately. He was examining the spot where the creature had been standing. His light fell on a mangled shape on the concrete floor. A large stray dog, its neck broken, discarded like trash. It hadn't been feeding, just killed it as it passed. Pointless violence. Yeah, Clay finally said, his voice tight. I saw it. He'd also seen the way it moved, the almost unnatural speed and power. And he'd felt its awareness. It knew it was being followed. That diversion wasn't random instinct. It felt calculated. He turned back towards the entrance, his mind racing. It was faster than he'd anticipated, and possibly smarter. Getting a clear shot wasn't going to be easy. He looked at Miller, whose face was pale in the flashlight beam. It knows we're here now, Clay stated grimly. It knows we're hunting it. This just got harder. The brief, terrifying encounter hadn't yielded a shot, but it had yielded crucial intelligence. The beast was powerful, fast, aware, and moving with brutal efficiency, and Clay had the distinct chilling feeling that it wasn't just running anymore. The adrenaline from the close call faded slowly, leaving behind a residue of cold tension. Clay and Sheriff Miller emerged from the dark, echoing warehouse into the relative quiet of the pre-dawn hours. The eastern sky was just beginning to pale, hinting at the approach of another scorching Texas day. Clay felt the pressure of time acutely. Whatever this creature was doing, it seemed linked to the darkness. Okay, Miller said, running a shaky hand through his thinning hair. Okay, so it's real. Big, fast, mean as hell. And heading west. What now? Just keep following. Clay shook his head, leaning against the side of Miller's SUV, his gaze distant as he replayed the encounter in his mind. Blindly chasing it isn't smart. It knows we're onto it now. It could lead us into an ambush, or just disappear into the brush country out west. We need to figure out why it's moving this way, where it's going. He unfolded the city map Miller had given him earlier, spreading it across the hood of the SUV under the dome light. He took out a pen and marked the locations. The first attack site, the second, the alley behind the diner, the stockyards, the warehouse where they'd just encountered it. He drew lines connecting the dots, noting the general westward trajectory, but also the specific infrastructure used. Storm drains, the abandoned rail line. It's avoiding open areas using cover, Clay mused, tracing the path with his finger. Knows the city's underbelly, but it's not random wandering. There's a direction. He looked up at Miller. Anything significant out west? Along this corridor? Old landmarks? Power stations? Anything unusual? Miller frowned, studying the map. Not much, really. It's mostly derelict industrial stuff. Then it opens up into ranch land and scrub. Let's see. The old Trinity River pumping station hasn't been used in decades. Further out, there's supposed to be some old abandoned silver mine, but that's mostly local legend, probably flooded. Silver mine? Clay's attention sharpened. Silver was often significant in folklore related to such creatures. Tell me about that. Ah, it's just stories the old-timers tell, Miller said dismissively. Said there was a small silver boom here way back, late 1800s. Supposedly dried up quick. The location's not even marked on modern maps. Some say it was cursed. Cursed how? Clay pressed gently. You know, the usual stuff. Miller shrugged. Disappearances, strange accidents. People said the place was haunted or guarded by, well, by things. Like I said, just stories. Clay remained silent for a moment, considering. Folklore often contained corrupted kernels of truth, especially when dealing with phenomena outside normal understanding. A creature moving deliberately westward, towards a location tied to local legends, possibly involving silver. It felt significant. Anyone in town know these stories well? A local historian? Someone who collects that kind of stuff? Miller thought for a second. There's old Dr. Aris Thorne. Taught history at the community college before he retired. Lives over on Cedar Street. Bit eccentric. Collects all sorts of local artifacts and weird tales. If anyone knows about cursed silver mines and things that go bump in the Texas night, it'd be him. Let's pay Dr. Thorne a visit, Clay decided, folding the map. Maybe his weird tales can shed some light on where our friend is heading. The drive back towards the residential part of Brazos Creek City felt different now. The rising sun was painting the sky in soft pastels. But the beauty felt jarring against the undercurrent of fear and the knowledge of the creature moving somewhere in the shadows. Dr. Thorne lived in a small, neat clapboard house, overflowing with books and artifacts. Even from the outside, Clay could see stacks of papers visible through the front window. Miller knocked, and after a moment, the door opened a crack, revealing a man with a cloud of white hair, spectacles perched on his nose, and bright, inquisitive eyes. Sheriff Miller? Dr. Thorne peered out. To what do I owe the pleasure at this early hour? Sorry to disturb you, Dr. Thorne, Miller said respectfully. This is a consultant, Mr. Brody. We need your expertise on some local history, specifically old legends about the area west of the city. Thorne's eyes lit up with interest. Legends? Fascinating! Come in, come in! He ushered them into a living room that was less a living space and more a personal museum crossed with a library. Bookshelves lined every wall, crammed too deep. Glass cases displayed arrowheads, old bottles, faded photographs, and stranger items Clay couldn't immediately identify. The air smelled of old paper, dust, and lemon polish. Please sit, Thorne fussed, clearing stacks of books off two chairs. What particular legends are we exploring this fine morning? We're interested in the old silver mine, Clay said directly, getting straight to the point. The one supposedly west of town. Thorne adjusted his spectacles, his expression turning thoughtful. Ah, the lost Spaniard mine, some called it, though the geology never really supported major silver deposits here. Yes, a place steeped in peculiar folklore. He walked over to a large antique map hanging on the wall, depicting the county as it was a century ago. "The stories vary," Thorne explained, pointing to a sparsely detailed area west of the town limits on the old map. "Some say it was indeed cursed by displaced Native American tribes. Others speak of strange illnesses afflicting the miners, but the most persistent tales, the ones whispered rather than spoken aloud, mentioned a guardian." "A guardian?" Miller prompted. "Yes," Thorne said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Not human. Descriptions are fragmented, likely exaggerated over time. A large beast, incredibly strong, active mostly at night, particularly around the full moon. Said to attack anyone who disturbed the mine or the surrounding territory. They called it different things. Lobo Diablo, the Night Howler. Primitive attempts to name the unnameable, perhaps." Clay felt a prickle of recognition. Guardian. Territorial. Nocturnal. It fit the profile. "Does the law mention anything else?" Clay asked. "Weaknesses? Silver?" Thorne nodded slowly. "Silver, yes. Interestingly, it features prominently. Not just the mine itself, but tales of hunters using silver objects, even blessed silver, to ward off or injure the beast. Crude charms, silver bullets in later accounts, considered the only reliable defense. Folk remedies, superstition perhaps," he added quickly, as if catching himself sounding too credulous, "but persistent." He peered at Clay over his spectacles. "Why this sudden interest in century-old ghost stories, gentlemen? Surely this isn't related to the unfortunate events the city's been experiencing?" Clay met the old historian's gaze. "Maybe those old stories aren't just stories, Doctor." Thorne absorbed this, his initial academic curiosity shifting into dawning realization and alarm. He looked from Clay's intense face to Miller's grim expression. The pieces clicked into place. The unfortunate events weren't random animal attacks. They were something else, something old and dark, and potentially linked to the very legends he collected. The cursed mine, the guardian beast, the silver. It wasn't just history anymore. It was happening now. Dr. Thorne's study, previously a haven of dusty academic curiosity, now felt charged with immediate chilling relevance. The old map, with its faded ink and forgotten locations, seemed less like a historical artifact and more like a blueprint for a nightmare. Clay traced the possible route west from the warehouses, aligning it with the general direction Thorne indicated for the lost silver mine legends. If this thing is territorial, and if that mine is somehow its center, Clay reasoned, thinking aloud, then it might be heading back there now, especially after being disturbed. Disturbed and possibly wounded, Miller added, remembering the crash of barrels in the warehouse. "You think you hit it?" "Didn't get a clean shot," Clay admitted. "Might have grazed it, might have just startled it. Either way, it knows it's being hunted. Could make it more predictable, heading for familiar ground. Or it could make it more dangerous." "So, the plan is to head out towards where this mine is supposed to be and wait for it?" Miller asked, sounding dubious. "Better than chasing its tracks through miles of open country," Clay confirmed. "We need to get ahead of it. Find a choke point along its likely path. Force an encounter on our terms." He looked back at the map, then at Thorne. "Doctor, based on the terrain and the old trails marked here, where would be the most logical route for something moving fast, trying to stay relatively hidden, heading towards that mine area. Thorn, still processing the implications, adjusted his spectacles and leaned closer to the map. He traced a finger along dry creek beds and old cattle trails shown on the antique chart. Westward, it gets more rugged. Hills, ravines, if it's following the old Trinity River tributary, avoiding the higher ridges. Perhaps near the old pumping station Miller mentioned. The river narrows there, passes through a rocky section, fewer ways around. Clay nodded, recognizing the tactical advantage. A natural funnel. The old pumping station. Can we get there quickly and relatively quietly? There's an old service road, Miller said, barely used, probably overgrown, but it should get us close, faster than following the rail lines or the riverbed on foot anyway. Let's go, Clay said, already moving towards the door. Dr. Thorne, thank you. Your information might be crucial. Be careful, gentlemen, Thorne urged, his face etched with newfound worry. These aren't just stories anymore. The drive out of Brazos Creek City towards the west felt like crossing a threshold. The paved roads gave way to gravel, then to the bumpy, overgrown service track Miller had mentioned. Clay's pickup handled the rough terrain better than the sheriff's SUV would have. Branches scraped against the paintwork, and the tires spun occasionally on loose rock, but Clay navigated it with practiced skill. The sun was climbing higher now, beating down relentlessly, but the knowledge of what hunted in the darkness and what they were heading towards kept a chill in the air. They parked the truck half a mile from the estimated location of the pumping station, concealing it as best they could behind a thicket of mesquite. The rest of the way was on foot, moving cautiously through the increasingly wild landscape. The air was still, heavy with heat and the buzzing of insects. They could hear the faint gurgle of the Trinity River tributary somewhere nearby. Clay took point, his specialized rifle held ready, his senses alert. He scanned the ground for tracks, the surrounding brush for movement, the air for that telltale musky scent. Miller followed, his service revolver drawn, looking distinctly uncomfortable out of his urban element. They reached the pumping station overlook, a dilapidated brick structure perched above a narrow, rocky section of the riverbed, which was mostly dry now, just a trickle of water snaking through the stones. Broken windows stared out like empty eyes. Rusted machinery lay scattered around it. It was isolated, quiet, and offered good lines of sight up and down the riverbed, the creature's most likely path. "All right," Clay said quietly, surveying the area. "This is the spot. It comes through here. It has to cross that open rocky section." He pointed. "We set up here, behind the building. Good cover, clear shot." The wait began. It was agonizingly tense. The Texas sun beat down, reflecting off the rocks, making the air shimmer. Every rustle in the bushes, every bird call, every distant animal's sound made them jump. Minutes stretched into an hour, then 2. Doubt began to creep in. Had they miscalculated? Had the creature taken a different route? Or was it already long gone? Clay remained patient, motionless, scanning the riverbed downstream, then upstream. His instincts, honed over years of tracking far different prey, told him they were in the right place. He could almost feel the approach, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a prickling on his skin. Then he saw it, a flicker of movement far downstream, where the riverbed curved out of sight behind a rocky outcrop. A dark shape moving low and fast along the edge of the trickle of water. It disappeared behind the rocks again, but Clay knew. It was coming. He signaled silently to Miller, who tensed, raising his revolver with trembling hands. Clay settled into position behind a crumbling brick wall, resting the heavy rifle on the edge, sighting down the scope towards the point where the creature would emerge into the open riverbed. His breathing was steady, his focus absolute. The shape reappeared closer now. It moved with an unnerving, loping gait, covering ground with deceptive speed. Even at this distance, its unnatural size and dark, shaggy form were clear. It paused, head raised, sniffing the air, testing the wind. Did it sense them? It seemed satisfied and continued forward, entering the wide, rocky clearing directly below their position. Clay tracked it smoothly in his scope, centering the crosshairs on its upper torso, waiting for the clearest shot. It was angling slightly away, offering a profile view. Now. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against his shoulder, the crack of the shot echoing sharply in the river valley. The heavy, silver-jacketed round crossed the distance in an instant. Clay saw the impact. A spray of dark fur and something else, liquid and dark, erupting from the creature's shoulder area. The beast let out a piercing howl, a sound of pure agony and rage that chilled Clay to the bone despite the heat. It stumbled, its powerful hind legs buckling, but it didn't go down. It spun around, its glowing eyes instantly locking onto their position behind the wall, raw fury radiating from it. Before Clay could chamber another round, it moved. Ignoring the grievous wound, it charged directly towards the pumping station, bounding over the rocks with terrifying speed, its massive form eating up the distance. "Shoot!" Clay yelled at Miller, working the bolt action frantically. Miller fired his revolver. Pop, pop, pop. The small caliber bullets seeming to have no effect, ricocheting off the creature's thick hide or embedding themselves without slowing it. The werewolf hit the slope below the pumping station and scrambled upwards, claws finding purchase on the loose rock and brickwork. It was coming straight for them, its jaws wide in a terrifying snarl, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth. Clay finally chambered the next round, brought the rifle up. But the creature was too close, moving too fast for a clear shot. It launched itself over the wall. Clay barely had time to react, throwing himself sideways as the massive beast landed where he'd been moments before. Miller yelled, firing again at point-blank range. The creature swatted him contemptuously, sending the sheriff crashing hard against the brick wall of the station, his revolver clattering away. Clay rolled, coming up onto one knee, rifle aimed. But the creature was already turning on him, its wounded shoulder leaking dark fluid, its eyes burning with hate. It lunged. There was no time for aiming, no time for tactical thought, only raw instinct. As the massive werewolf lunged, its claws slashing through the air where Clay's head had been, he reacted purely on ingrained combat reflexes. He didn't try to fire the rifle at such close, chaotic range. Instead, he thrust the heavy barrel upwards like a spear, jamming it hard under the creature's jaw. The impact jarred his arms, and the beast let out a choked snarl. Its head snapping back. It wasn't enough to stop it, but it bought Clay a precious fraction of a second. He scrambled backwards, kicking loose gravel, trying to put distance between himself and the snapping teeth. The werewolf stumbled slightly from the blow, shaking its huge head, saliva and dark blood flying from its muzzle. Its burning eyes never left Clay. Clay regained his footing, rifle held defensively. He saw Sheriff Miller slumped against the wall, groaning but conscious, clutching his arm where the creature had struck him. The immediate threat was still the beast, looming barely 10 feet away, wounded but radiating lethal fury. It gathered itself, powerful muscles bunching beneath the dark fur, preparing for another charge. Clay knew he wouldn't survive a direct grapple. He had to create an opening. He risked a quick glance around. The crumbling pumping station walls, the steep drop-off behind him into the rocky riverbed, the scattered debris of rusted machinery. The werewolf lunged again, lower this time, aiming to take out his legs. Clay sidestepped, letting the creature's momentum carry it past him, and simultaneously swung the heavy rifle like a club, connecting solidly with its flank. The beast yelped more in surprise than pain, and stumbled, its claws scrabbling for purchase on the loose ground. Clay didn't press the attack. He used the moment to retreat further, putting a large rusted piece of machinery, part of an old pump, between himself and the werewolf. He needed space, needed a moment to think beyond pure survival. The creature recovered quickly, circling the obstacle, its low growl a constant menacing vibration in the air. Its wounded shoulder was bleeding freely now, dripping dark viscous fluid onto the dusty ground, but the injury seemed only to fuel its rage. It watched Clay with a terrifying predatory intelligence. This wasn't just a mindless beast anymore. It was focusing its fury, calculating. Clay risked another glance at Miller. The sheriff was trying to push himself up, his face pale with pain. "My arm! Think it's broken!" he gasped. "Stay down!" Clay ordered, his attention snapping back to the werewolf as it feinted a move to the left, then darted right. Clay mirrored its movement, keeping the rusty pump between them. Stalemate. But not for long. The creature was clearly stronger, faster, and healing wouldn't be a problem for it, unlike for Miller. Then the creature did something unexpected. Instead of continuing to circle, it stopped. It lowered its head slightly, its glowing eyes fixed on Clay, and let out a long drawn-out howl. Not the howl of pain it had uttered when shot, but something different, resonant, carrying, echoing through the river valley. A call? A warning? Clay felt a cold dread seep into him. What if it wasn't alone? What if this wasn't just a guardian, but one of several? The thought was paralyzing, but no answering howl came. The echoes faded, leaving only the heavy breathing of the beast and the tense silence. It lowered its head again, seemingly realizing Clay wasn't easily intimidated, and resumed its circling, more cautiously now. Clay knew he couldn't stay here. Miller needed medical attention, and delaying would only give the werewolf time to wear him down or wait for potential backup. He had to break the stalemate, create a diversion. His eyes scanned the derelict pumping station, an old fuel tank, rusted but maybe not entirely empty. Too risky. Loose bricks on the crumbling wall. Maybe. The werewolf lunged suddenly, not at Clay, but at the rusted pump between them. It slammed its massive weight against the old iron, which groaned and shifted but held. Clay used the instant the creature was off balance. He fired the rifle, not aiming for a kill shot, too difficult with the constant movement, but aiming for the ground right in front of the beast's feet. The bullet kicked up a spray of rock shards and dust. The werewolf flinched back instinctively, startled by the sudden explosion at its feet. It was the opening Clay needed. "Miller, move, now!" Clay yelled, backing away rapidly towards the edge of the overlook, keeping the rifle trained on the momentarily confused werewolf. Miller, understanding immediately, used his good arm to push himself away from the wall, scrambling awkwardly towards the path leading back to the truck. The werewolf recovered in seconds, its snarl intensifying as it saw its prey trying to escape. It ignored Clay for the moment and bounded towards the retreating sheriff. Clay didn't hesitate. He fired again, aiming for the creature's hind leg this time. The shot connected with a heavy thud. The werewolf yelped, its leg buckling, but it didn't stop its momentum, crashing through the brush after Miller. Clay knew he couldn't let it reach the sheriff. He broke cover himself, running parallel to the creature, trying to get a clear shot, shouting to draw its attention. "Hey, over here!" It worked. The beast, enraged and wounded, momentarily forgot Miller and spun towards the more immediate threat, Clay. It came charging back towards him, limping slightly, but losing none of its terrifying speed. Clay backpedaled desperately, firing the rifle again, but the shot went wide as he stumbled on the uneven ground. The werewolf was almost on top of him. He braced himself for the impact, bringing the rifle up defensively. Suddenly, the ground beneath the creature gave way. It had charged onto a section of the overlook weakened by erosion and the pumping station's decay. With a surprised snarl, the werewolf tumbled downwards, crashing 15 feet into the rocky riverbed below with a sickening crunch. Clay scrambled to the edge, rifle ready, peering down. The creature lay twisted unnaturally amongst the stones, motionless. Was it dead? Or just stunned? He watched intently, searching for any sign of movement, any breath. After a long moment, it didn't stir. He risked a glance back towards the path. Miller had made it into the thicker brush, hopefully heading for the truck. Clay knew he should follow, get Miller to safety, but he couldn't leave the werewolf without confirming the kill. He started cautiously looking for a way down into the riverbed, his rifle ready, every nerve screaming that this wasn't over yet. The hunter had become the hunted, and though the beast was down, the feeling of being watched, of the situation being dangerously unstable, remained stronger than ever. The silence in the riverbed was heavy, broken only by the trickle of water over stones and the ragged sound of Clay's own breathing. He scanned the rocky terrain below, finding a slightly less steep section of the slope a short distance away. Keeping his rifle trained on the motionless form of the werewolf, he carefully began his descent, boots sliding on loose scree, his senses on high alert. Every instinct screamed trap. It looked too easy. Creatures like this were notoriously hard to kill, possessed of unnatural vitality. A 15-foot fall onto rocks? Maybe enough to stun it, break bones, but kill it outright. Doubt gnawed at him. He reached the bottom of the slope, landing softly on the sandy edge of the riverbed. He was maybe 30 yards from the fallen creature. It lay awkwardly, one massive leg bent at an impossible angle, its head twisted sideways. Dark blood pooled slowly on the pale rocks beneath its shoulder and hind leg wounds. Still no movement, no sound. Clay advanced cautiously, circling wide, keeping the werewolf's body in his line of sight. He held the rifle ready, finger near the trigger, safety off. Closer now, 20 yards. He could see the ragged rise and fall of its ribcage. Shallow, but definitely breathing. Not dead, just injured, maybe unconscious. He had to finish it. Now, while it was down. He raised the rifle, aiming carefully for the head. The surest way, folklore be damned, though the thick skull presented its own challenges. His finger tightened on the trigger. A sudden, sharp whistling sound cut through the air, followed instantly by a searing pain in his left shoulder. Clay cried out, stumbling back, the rifle falling from his suddenly numb grasp. He clutched at his shoulder, feeling warm, sticky blood soaking through his jacket. What the hell? He looked up wildly, scanning the top of the ravine, the pumping station ruins, the surrounding brush. Nothing. Where had it come from? A ricochet. Another hunter. Then a low growl emanated from the spot where the werewolf lay. Clay's head snapped back towards it. The creature was stirring. Its head lifted slowly, painfully, from the rocks. Its glowing eyes fixed on him, filled not with the raging fury of moments ago, but with a cold, calculating malice. And behind it, emerging silently from the deep shadows beneath an overhanging section of the riverbank that Clay hadn't cleared, stood another shape, smaller than the first werewolf, leaner, but radiating the same unnatural menace. This one was grey-furred, almost silver in the harsh sunlight, and its eyes burned with the same malevolent intelligence. It held something in its hand, not a clawed paw, but a hand still retaining some human dexterity, a crudely fashioned crossbow, aimed directly at Clay. Two of them. The howl hadn't been fury or pain alone. It had been a call. Clay felt a freezing wave of despair wash over him. All his assumptions, his plans, worthless. He wasn't hunting a lone beast. He was caught between a wounded alpha and its backup. His rifle lay uselessly on the ground several feet away. His specialized knife was still strapped to his thigh, but drawing it would mean taking his hand off his bleeding shoulder, and the grey werewolf with the crossbow hadn't lowered its weapon. His backup handgun? Maybe, but the draw would be slow, awkward with his injured arm. The first werewolf, the larger dark one, began to drag itself upright, ignoring the mangled leg, its gaze locked onto Clay. It let out another low growl, clearly communicating with its companion. The grey one shifted its aim slightly, keeping the crossbow leveled at Clay's chest. Trapped, outnumbered, wounded, his primary weapon lost. Miller injured and alone somewhere back towards the truck. This was bad. This was catastrophic. Every mistake he'd made, underestimating the threat, assuming it was alone, not confirming the kill immediately, crashed down on him. Echoes of past failures whispered in his mind. The mission gone wrong. The comrades lost. It was happening again. He had to escape. He couldn't fight both of them, especially injured. He took a hesitant step backwards, eyes darting between the two werewolves, trying to gauge their intent. The grey one tensed, the crossbow string tightening slightly. A clear warning, don't move! The large dark werewolf dragged itself forward a few feet, its damaged leg trailing uselessly. It stopped swaying slightly, then lowered its head and let out a sound that wasn't a growl or a howl, but almost like a cough. A rough, gagging sound. Something dark and wet spewed from its mouth onto the rocks. Clay watched, confused, then horrified, as the shape began to change. Fur seemed to recede, bones cracked and shifted with audible pops, the massive frame shrinking, contorting. It was agonizing to watch, a grotesque, unnatural transformation. Within seconds, The monstrous form collapsed inwards, resolving into the shape of a man, naked, horrifically pale, covered in blood and grime, his limbs twisted at unnatural angles from the fall and the forced reversion. He lay twitching and groaning on the rocks, clearly near death. Clay stared, momentarily stunned by the horrific spectacle. He'd heard of this, rapid reversion upon catastrophic injury or death, but had never witnessed it. It hammered home the horrifying duality of the creature. His shock was broken by the grey werewolf. It lowered the crossbow slightly, its intelligent eyes watching Clay's reaction. It seemed almost contemptuous. It took a step towards the dying man on the rocks, nudging him with its snout, then looked back at Clay, tilting its head in a disturbingly thoughtful gesture. Clay understood the implication. It wasn't going to kill him immediately. It wanted him to see this, to understand the stakes. Maybe it even wanted him alive for some reason. But escape was still paramount. He risked another backward step. The grey werewolf let him, its attention briefly diverted by the dying man, who let out a final, rattling gasp and lay still. Clay used that moment. He lunged sideways, not for his fallen rifle, but towards the deeper shadows under the riverbank overhang where the grey one had emerged. If he could break line of sight, find cover. The grey werewolf reacted instantly, raising the crossbow and firing. The bolt hissed past Clay's ear, thudding into the dirt bank behind him. He didn't stop, diving into the shadows, rolling behind a cluster of large boulders. He scrambled deeper into the narrow space, heart pounding, shoulder throbbing, pressing himself against the cool, damp earth. He heard the creature moving outside his hiding spot, the scrape of claws on rock. It knew where he was. He fumbled for the heavy knife on his thigh, pulling it free, the silver-edged blade gleaming faintly in the gloom. It felt pitifully inadequate against two werewolves, one likely still armed with a crossbow. He was trapped, injured, disarmed, and facing an enemy far more complex and dangerous than he'd imagined. Miller was vulnerable. The beasts were still out there. Everything had gone wrong. This wasn't just a setback. This felt like utter defeat. The despair was a cold, heavy weight in his chest. All lost, pressed against the damp earth behind the boulders. Clay focused on controlling his breathing, trying to ignore the throbbing agony in his shoulder. The bolt wound wasn't deep. It seemed to have skipped off the bone, but it bled persistently, and the impact had bruised him badly, making his whole arm feel heavy and useless. Outside his narrow hiding spot, he could hear the grey werewolf moving, sniffing the air, the occasional scrape of its claws unnervingly close. It was searching, patient. Despair was a physical weight, crushing the air from his lungs. He'd failed. Failed Miller, failed the town, failed himself. The ghosts of past failures crowded in, the faces of lost comrades, the echo of frantic, unanswered radio calls. He'd run to the silence of his ranch to escape this feeling, this utter helplessness. But the violence had found him anyway. And this time, it felt final. Outnumbered, outmaneuvered, wounded. What chance did he have? He closed his eyes for a second. The darkness behind his eyelids filled with the image of the dying man transforming on the rocks, the grey beast's cold, intelligent eyes, the glint of the crossbow. He could just stay here, hidden, wait for the inevitable, bleed out, or wait for the creature to find him. Then another image surfaced. Sheriff Miller, his face pale with pain but determined, scrambling away towards the truck. Miller hadn't given up. He was relying on Clay, and Dr. Thorne, his academic curiosity turned to genuine alarm, trusting them to handle the weird tales made real. The people of Brazos Creek City huddled behind boarded windows, terrified. Giving up wasn't just failing himself. It was failing all of them. Anger began to smolder beneath the despair, a small hot spark in the cold darkness. Anger at the creatures for their brutality. Anger at himself for his mistakes. Anger at the situation. It was a familiar feeling, a catalyst he'd used before. It wouldn't fix his shoulder or retrieve his rifle, but it burned away the paralysis of despair. He had to move. He had to think. What did he have left? His knife, heavy, sharp, silver-edged. His backup handgun, a .45 automatic, tucked into the small of his back holster. Standard rounds, but better than nothing. His knowledge and his training. He listened intently again. The grey werewolf seemed to be concentrating its search further down the riverbed now, perhaps assuming Clay had tried to flee downstream under cover of the bank. A brief respite, but it wouldn't last. He needed his rifle. The silver rounds were his only real advantage against these things. It lay out there in the open, maybe 20 yards away. Getting to it seemed impossible. He carefully eased his handgun from its holster with his good right hand. Checked the magazine. Full. 7 rounds. Not much against a werewolf, but maybe enough to create a diversion. His eyes scanned his immediate surroundings in the dim light. Rocks, dirt, tangled roots protruding from the overhang. He noticed a glint of metal near his boot. One of the spent cartridges ejected from his rifle during the earlier exchange. An idea began to form, desperate and risky. He still had a few loose, silver-jacketed rounds in a pouch on his belt. He carefully took one out, compared it to the standard .45 round from his handgun. Different caliber, different size, useless, unless... He looked at the heavy silver-edged knife in his hand. The blade was thick, strong. What if he could shave off fragments of the silver coating from the knife's edge? It wouldn't be much, wouldn't be like a solid silver bullet, but maybe enough to make a standard bullet more effective. A desperate gamble based on folklore and Thorne's words, but it was better than nothing. Working carefully with his right hand, hampered by the awkward angle, and the throbbing in his left shoulder, he began to scrape the thick spine of the knife blade against a rough section of boulder. Tiny, gleaming fragments of the silver coating flaked off onto a flat stone he'd placed underneath. It was slow, painstaking work. He needed to be quiet. He managed to gather a small pile of gleaming dust and tiny shavings. Then, the difficult part, he ejected a standard round from his handgun's magazine. Holding the bullet carefully, he used the sticky residue of pine sap from a nearby root to coat the tip of the lead bullet. Then he gently rolled the sticky tip in the silver fragments, trying to get as many as possible to adhere. It was a crude, improvised silver-tipped bullet. He carefully reinserted the modified round into the magazine, making it the first one to be chambered. He repeated the process, working as quickly and quietly as possible, managing to modify 3 more rounds before his small pile of silver shavings was depleted. 4 silver-dusted rounds. Better than none. He chambered the first round, the feel of the slide racking home strangely comforting, solid. He now had a plan, however thin. First, retrieve the rifle. Second, find Miller. Third, finish the job. He took a deep breath, pushing the pain in his shoulder to the back of his mind. He peered cautiously out from behind the boulders. The grey werewolf was further down the riverbed now, sniffing around the spot where Clay had first descended. The body of the transformed man lay still. The rifle was still visible, lying on the rocks. This was his chance. He had to move now, while the grey one was distracted. He tensed, ready to break cover, the heavy handgun feeling both inadequate and his only hope. The spark of anger had forged a sliver of resolve. He wasn't dead yet, and the hunt wasn't over. Taking a final steadying breath, Clay exploded from behind the boulders. He ignored the jolt of pain in his shoulder, focusing entirely on his objective, the fallen rifle. He moved in a low crouch, using the scattered rocks of the riverbed as intermittent cover, his handgun held ready in his right hand. The grey werewolf reacted instantly to the sudden movement. It spun around, abandoning its search downstream, and let out a sharp, surprised snarl. It raised the crossbow, but Clay was already moving erratically, zigzagging between rocks, making himself a difficult target. A crossbow bolt whizzed past his head, closer this time, embedding itself in the sand near his feet. He didn't slow down. 10 yards to the rifle. The grey werewolf dropped the now useless crossbow and began loping towards him, closing the distance with terrifying speed, its claws clicking on the stones. 5 yards. Clay could see the heavy grain of the rifle's wooden stock, the dull gleam of the scope. The grey werewolf was almost on him, jaws snapping. He risked a shot with the handgun, firing one of his precious silver-dusted rounds without careful aim, hoping to distract or deter. The bullet struck the creature high on the chest. It wasn't like the rifle shot that had crippled the other one, but the grey werewolf visibly flinched, letting out a surprised yelp and momentarily breaking stride, shaking its head as if stung. Did the silver dust have an effect? Or was it just the impact? Clay didn't wait to find out. He lunged the final few feet, scooping up the heavy rifle with his good right hand. Awkwardly bracing the stock against his hip, he worked the bolt action, ejecting the spent casing from the confrontation at the pumping station and chambering a fresh, potent silver-jacketed round. He turned, bringing the rifle to bear just as the grey werewolf renewed its charge, seemingly enraged by the handgun shot. There was no time to aim properly, no time to shoulder the weapon with his injured arm. He fired from the hip. The heavy round slammed into the creature's leg, the same leg Clay had instinctively targeted on the larger beast earlier. The impact was devastating at close range. Bone shattered with an audible crack. The grey werewolf went down in a heap, howling in agony, its charge abruptly ended. Clay scrambled backwards, putting distance between them, finally managing to properly shoulder the rifle despite the searing pain. The grey werewolf snapped and snarled on the ground, trying to drag itself forward with its front legs, its mangled hind leg trailing uselessly. He wouldn't make the same mistake twice. He aimed carefully at the creature's head, compensating for the awkward angle and the throbbing in his shoulder. He squeezed the trigger. The shot was clean. The grey werewolf shuddered, then lay still, its struggles silenced for good. Silence descended again, profound and ringing after the violence. Clay stood breathing heavily, the rifle feeling immensely heavy. 2 down, but the cost had been high. His shoulder was on fire, his ammunition low, and Miller. Where was Miller? He scanned the top of the ravine. No sign of the sheriff. He had to get back up there, find him, make sure he was safe or get him help. But first, he reloaded the rifle, then cautiously approached the body of the grey werewolf. He needed to be certain. It remained still. He nudged it with his boot. No reaction. Definitely dead. He retrieved the crossbow lying nearby. Crude, but effective. He pocketed the few remaining bolts scattered on the ground. Might be useful. Then he turned his attention back to the first creature, the one that had transformed back into a man. Its body lay pale and broken on the rocks. Clay felt a grim sense of finality, but also unease. Why two? Why the apparent intelligence, the use of a weapon? This felt bigger than just a territorial dispute. He forced the questions aside. Priority one, Miller. He found the path he'd used to descend and began the painful climb back up, using the rifle for balance. His injured arm protesting with every movement. Reaching the top, he scanned the area around the pumping station. Empty. "Miller!" he called out, his voice hoarse. "Sheriff!" A weak groan answered him from the direction of the path leading back towards the truck. Clay hurried that way. Pushing through the brush, he found Miller leaning against a tree 50 yards down the path, conscious but pale, cradling his obviously broken arm. "Clay!" Miller rasped, relief flooding his face. Thought it got you." "Got both of them," Clay said tersely, kneeling beside him. "How bad is the arm?" "Busted good, I think." Miller winced. "Saw you go over the edge, then heard more shots." "What happened?" "Long story," Clay said, quickly assessing the sheriff. No other obvious injuries, but he was likely in shock. "Can you walk?" "Think so. Slowly." "All right, let's get you back to the truck. We need to get you proper medical attention, and we need to get out of here." He didn't like this place. Didn't like the feeling of lingering unseen threats. He helped Miller to his feet, supporting him with his good shoulder. They began the slow, arduous trek back towards where they'd left the pickup. Every step was an effort for both of them. Clay kept scanning the surroundings, rifle ready, convinced they were still being watched. They finally reached the truck, half hidden in the mesquite. Clay helped Miller into the passenger seat, then quickly checked his own gear. He had the rifle, 3 silver rounds left. The handgun, 3 silver-dusted rounds, and a few standard ones. The knife, the crossbow, maybe 4 bolts. Not much if something else came calling. He climbed into the driver's seat, the movement sending fresh waves of pain through his shoulder. He started the engine, the familiar roar, a welcome sound in the hostile quiet. He turned the truck around, bumping over the rough track, heading back towards Brazos Creek City. As they drove, Clay glanced back in the rearview mirror towards the silent, sun-baked pumping station and the riverbed hidden below. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease. The fight felt too contained, too neat despite the chaos. Killing the 2 werewolves felt less like an ending and more like dealing with symptoms. What was the real source? The mine? Was there something else there? Something that had sent those 2 out? He thought of the Grey One's intelligence, its use of the crossbow, the way the Dark One had reverted upon death. This wasn't just animalistic rage. There was something older, colder, and more calculating at play here. He had won the battle at the riverbed, but the war for Brazos Creek City, he suspected, wasn't over. The true lair wasn't that pumping station. It was somewhere else. Waiting, the drive back towards Brazos Creek City was a blur of pain and grim determination for Clay. Miller drifted in and out of consciousness beside him, occasionally groaning as the truck bounced over the rough track. Clay kept glancing at the fuel gauge, just under half a tank. Enough to get back, but not much room for error. The sun beat down, making the cab stifling, but the chilling unease remained. He couldn't shake the feeling that killing the two werewolves hadn't ended the threat. It felt like cutting off the arms of something, not destroying the heart. The mine, the lost Spaniard mine, as Thorne called it. The persistent legends, the guardian beast, the silver. It all pointed there. What if the creatures at the river were just sentries, protectors of a deeper source? What if the real Alpha, the source of the problem, was still out there, rooted in that cursed place? As they neared the outskirts of the city, the adrenaline that had sustained Clay began to fade, leaving behind exhaustion and the throbbing reality of his injuries. He needed medical attention himself, needed rest, but the thought of leaving the job unfinished, of leaving that potential source festering out there in the hills while the city breathed a false sigh of relief, felt wrong, irresponsible. Another potential failure waiting to happen. He drove straight to the small county hospital, pulling up to the emergency entrance. He helped Miller out, quickly explaining the situation, severe arm injury, possible shock, to the startled nurses who rushed out. As they wheeled Miller inside, the sheriff looked back at Clay, his eyes conveying a mixture of gratitude and worry. "Clay, be careful." Clay just nodded grimly. He watched Miller disappear through the doors, then turned back to his truck. He wasn't going inside, not yet. He checked his reflection in the truck's dusty window. Grim, blood-stained, exhausted. He looked like hell, but the look in his eyes was resolute. He knew what he had to do. Go back, find the mine, finish it. He rummaged in the truck's glove box, finding a small first aid kit. He cleaned his shoulder wound as best he could, applying a pressure bandage. It wouldn't hold for long, but it was better than nothing. He took stock of his remaining ammunition. 3 silver rifle rounds, 3 silver-dusted handgun rounds, a few standard handgun rounds, 4 crossbow bolts. Pitifully little. He needed more silver. He thought of Dr. Thorne's study, overflowing with artifacts. Hadn't Miller mentioned him collecting strange items? Maybe. He drove across town to Cedar Street, pulling up in front of the historian's house. It was still early morning, but lights were on inside. He knocked, harder than necessary. Dr. Thorne opened the door, his eyes widening in alarm at Clay's appearance. "Mr. Brody, good heavens, are you all right? Sheriff Miller?" "Miller's at the hospital, arm's broken, but he'll be okay," Clay said quickly, stepping inside. "The creatures dealt with 2 of them out near the old pumping station." Thorne looked momentarily relieved, then saw the grim determination on Clay's face. "But you don't think it's over?" "No," Clay stated flatly. "I think they were just sentries. I think the source is the mine. Doctor, your collection, do you have anything made of solid silver? Old candlesticks maybe, a serving tray, anything heavy?" Thorne blinked, then his eyes lit up with understanding. "Silver, of course, for bullets?" He hurried over to a glass display case. "Most of my pieces are plate, I'm afraid, but wait, yes." He carefully lifted out 2 heavy, tarnished silver candlesticks, clearly antique and solid. Sterling, from an old ranch estate auction years ago. Will these do? Perfect, Clay breathed, relief washing over him. He spent the next hour in Thorne's dusty workshop behind the house, using Thorne's tools, a small propane torch, pliers, a heavy file. He worked with grim focus. He melted down sections of the candlesticks, pouring the molten silver into crude molds fashioned from heat-resistant materials Thorne found. It was slow, painstaking work. He managed to cast several rough, misshapen slugs of silver. Then, using the file, he painstakingly shaped them, trying to create something aerodynamic enough to function as a bullet, even if inaccurate beyond close range. He focused on creating slugs that might fit his rifle caliber, hoping the soft silver would deform enough to work in the chamber, at least once. He also saved shavings and dust, applying them to his remaining standard handgun rounds. By the time he was finished, the sun was high, and his shoulder screamed in protest. He had maybe 5 crudely cast rifle slugs, and had managed to dust the rest of his handgun rounds. It wasn't pretty, but it was silver. Solid silver. He thanked Thorne, who looked at him with a mixture of fear and awe. Be careful, Mr. Brody. Legends often have teeth for a reason. Clay drove back out of the city, heading west again, this time aiming directly for the area where Thorne's old map indicated the lost Spaniard mine might be. He followed dusty ranch roads, pushing his truck as far as it could go, until the terrain became too rugged. He parked it under a cluster of live oaks and continued on foot, guided by the map, his compass, and instinct. The heat was oppressive. His shoulder throbbed with every step. Doubt gnawed at him again. Was he chasing ghosts? Following century-old legends into the wilderness based on a hunch? After nearly an hour of hiking through rocky hills and thorny scrub, he found it. Not a marked mine entrance, but a subtle depression in the hillside, almost hidden by overgrown brush. A narrow opening, like a dark wound in the earth, led downwards. The air emanating from it was cool, damp, and carried a faint, deeply unpleasant version of the musky odor he now knew too well. This was it, the lair. He checked his weapons, chambered one of the crude silver slugs in the rifle, hoping it wouldn't jam. Took a deep breath and plunged into the darkness. The tunnel sloped steeply downwards, rough-hewn rock underfoot. It was utterly black beyond the beam of his flashlight. The smell grew stronger, thicker, mixed with the scent of decay and something else, something ancient and stagnant. He moved slowly, cautiously, every sense straining. The tunnel opened into a larger cavern. His flashlight beam swept across damp rock walls, revealing old, rotting timbers, remnants of the original mine workings, and bones, piles of them in the corners, mostly animal, but disturbingly, some looked human. This was a charnel house. In the center of the cavern, something glinted. Clay approached cautiously. It was a pool of dark, still water, reflecting his light like obsidian. And rising from the center of the pool was a crude structure of rock and twisted roots, almost like an altar. Upon this altar lay nothing, but the sense of presence in the cavern was overwhelming, ancient, malevolent, waiting. Then a sound from the shadows behind the pool. A low growl, deeper and more resonant than the ones he'd heard at the river. Clay spun, raising his rifle, flashlight beam finding the source. It emerged slowly from the darkness, and Clay felt his blood run cold. This was no mere beast. It was huge, far larger than the dark one at the river. Its fur thick and black as night, its frame gaunt but immensely powerful. Its eyes glowed with ancient, hateful intelligence, far surpassing the cunning of the Grey One. This was the Alpha, the Source, the guardian of the cursed mine. It didn't charge immediately. It simply stood there, watching him, radiating an aura of primal power and ownership. It knew he was here. It had been waiting. Clay raised the rifle, the crude silver slug feeling heavy and uncertain in the chamber. This was it. One shot, maybe. He aimed for the center mass, the heart, praying the improvised bullet would fly true, praying the silver would work. He fired. The rifle roared in the enclosed space, the sound deafening. The silver slug hit the creature squarely in the chest. It staggered back, a deep guttural roar tearing from its throat, a sound of surprised agony and incandescent rage. But it didn't fall. It shook its massive head, dark blood welling from the wound, and fixed its burning eyes on Clay. It charged, faster than anything he'd ever seen, a black hurricane of claws and teeth hurtling across the cavern. Clay fumbled with the bolt action. It jammed. The crude slug had deformed, wedging the mechanism. Useless. He dropped the rifle, drawing his handgun in desperation, firing the silver-dusted rounds as he backpedaled frantically. Pop! 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 The bullets hit, making the creature flinch, but not stopping its terrifying momentum. It swiped at him, claws tearing through his already damaged jacket sleeve, narrowly missing flesh. He dodged sideways, stumbling over loose rocks, firing his last silver-dusted round. It hit the creature's muzzle, drawing a spray of blood. The Alpha roared again, momentarily blinded or stunned. Clay scrambled away, putting the dark pool between himself and the beast. His handgun was empty of silver rounds. He had the knife, the crossbow. Neither seemed adequate. The Alpha shook its head, clearing its vision, its fury reaching fever pitch. It stalked around the pool, cornering him against the cavern wall. Nowhere left to run. It gathered itself for the final lunge. Clay braced himself, holding the silver-edged knife in a desperate reversed grip, ready to sell his life dearly. This was the end. Then his eyes fell on the pool, the dark, still water. An idea, born of sheer desperation, flashed through his mind. He remembered Thorne's words. Silver, yes, but also blessed silver. Folk remedies, superstition. But what if? He didn't have blessed silver, but he had the source of the legends, the mine itself. The water within it, steeped for centuries in whatever cursed or unnatural energy resided here. As the Alpha lunged, Clay didn't meet the charge head-on. Instead, he dodged sideways again, scooping up a handful of the dark, cold water from the pool with his free hand and flinging it directly into the creature's face, into its open, roaring mouth. The effect was instantaneous and horrifying. The Alpha screamed, a sound unlike anything Clay had heard before, high-pitched, agonized, utterly unnatural. It recoiled violently, thrashing its head, clawing at its own face as if splashed with acid. Steam seemed to rise from its muzzle where the water had entered. It staggered backwards, away from Clay, stumbling, its powerful frame racked with convulsions. It crashed into the cavern wall, then slid to the floor, twitching, its limbs flailing weakly. A final, choked gasp escaped its throat. and then it lay still, the malevolent glow fading from its eyes, leaving only glassy emptiness. Clay stared, chest heaving, knife still clenched in his hand. The cavern was utterly silent, save for the dripping of water and the pounding of his own heart. The ancient evil, the source of the terror, lay dead at his feet, defeated not by silver bullets, but by the corrupted essence of its own lair. Slowly, painfully, Clay lowered the knife. He looked down at the slain Alpha, then around the bone-littered cavern. It was over, truly over. He had faced the heart of the darkness and survived. He sank to his knees, utterly spent. The weight of the battle, the injuries, and the sheer terror finally crashing down on him. He had done it. The bullet to the heart hadn't been lead or silver, but the poisoned water of the beast's own source. The silence in the cavern was absolute, profound. Clay remained kneeling for a long time, the adrenaline slowly draining away, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion and the throbbing ache in his shoulder. The flickering beam of his flashlight illuminated the grotesque scene. The massive, still form of the alpha werewolf, the scattered bones, the dark, stagnant pool. The air still felt heavy, ancient, but the palpable malevolence was gone, extinguished with the alpha's life. Slowly, painfully, he pushed himself to his feet. He retrieved his rifle, managing to clear the jammed casing with some effort. He picked up his handgun, reloading it with the few remaining standard rounds, no longer expecting trouble, but old habits died hard. He gave the dead alpha a wide berth, his gaze lingering on the creature that had been the source of so much terror. He needed to get out, back into the sun, back into the world of the living. The climb back up the sloping tunnel was arduous. His injured shoulder protested every movement, and fatigue weighed him down like lead. Emerging from the narrow opening back into the blinding Texas sunlight felt like being reborn. He blinked, letting the warmth soak into his chilled skin, breathing air that didn't smell of death and decay. He stood there for a moment, leaning against the hillside, simply absorbing the fact that he was alive, that it was over. The rugged landscape, previously seeming hostile, now looked almost peaceful under the afternoon sun. He had faced the beast, faced his own past failures, and somehow, impossibly, come out the other side. The hike back to the truck was slow, each step an effort. He focused on putting one foot in front of the other, the image of the silent cavern etched into his mind. By the time he reached the pickup, dusty and blood-stained, he was running on fumes. He drove back towards Brazos Creek City, the setting sun painting the sky in dramatic streaks of orange and purple, the same colors he often watched from his lonely ranch porch. But tonight, they looked different. Less like a bruise, more like a promise. He didn't go back to the hospital immediately. Instead, he found himself pulling up, almost automatically, outside Dr. Thorne's house again. The lights were still on. He knocked gently. Thorne opened the door, his eyes immediately searching Clay's face, reading the exhaustion, the grime, but also the subtle shift in his demeanor. "Mr. Brody, is it?" "It's done," Clay said quietly, leaning heavily against the doorframe. "The source, in the old mine, it's finished." Thorne stared at him, speechless for a moment. Then a look of profound relief washed over his face. He seemed to grasp the immense effort and danger involved without needing details. "Thank God," he whispered. "Come in, sit down. You look like you're about to collapse." Clay allowed himself to be ushered inside, sinking gratefully into one of the book-laden chairs. Thorn bustled about, getting him water, fussing over his makeshift bandage. Clay didn't offer details of the final confrontation. He didn't think Thorn truly wanted to know. It was enough that the nightmare was over. He stayed only a few minutes, long enough to reassure the old historian and retrieve the unused silver candlestick, leaving it back in its case. Finally, he drove to the hospital. He was admitted quietly, treated for the crossbow wound, exhaustion, and dehydration. He deflected questions about how he sustained the injury, offering vague answers about a tracking accident. He saw Miller briefly the next morning. The sheriff's arm was set and heavily cast, but his color was better, his eyes clear. "Heard you went back out," Miller said, his voice full of unspoken questions and gratitude. "Figured you might. You okay?" "I'm all right," Clay said. "It's over, Dale, for good this time." Miller nodded slowly, accepting Clay's word without question. "The town owes you. I owe you." Clay just shrugged, uncomfortable with the thanks. Just did what needed doing. He didn't stay long. Hospitals, like crowded towns, weren't his natural habitat. A few days later, properly bandaged and rested, though still aching, Clay checked himself out of the hospital. He climbed back into his dusty pickup truck. He could feel the town breathing easier around him, the oppressive blanket of fear slowly lifting, though the memory of the attacks would linger for a long time. He drove out of Brazos Creek City, heading west, back towards the silence. But as he drove, he realized the silence he sought felt different now. Before, it had been a shield, a place to hide from the ghosts of failure. Now, it felt more like peace, earned peace. He had faced the darkness, both external and internal, and hadn't broken. He hadn't run. He had finished the job. He reached his ranch as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the familiar dusty landscape. The small house looked the same, isolated, quiet. But as he stepped onto the porch, the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt calm. He knew the scars, both physical and mental, would remain. The memories wouldn't vanish completely, but they no longer held the same power. He had faced the beast in the dark cavern, and in doing so, had perhaps quieted some of the beasts within himself. He didn't know what the future held, whether he would remain in this self-imposed isolation forever. But as he watched the last sliver of the sun dip below the Texas horizon, Clayton Brody felt, for the first time in a very long time, a sense of quiet, weary resolution. The hunt was over. You just walked through the darkness with Clay. You felt the tension, the fear, the desperate fight for survival. If stories like this grab you, if they make your heart pound and keep you holding your breath, then don't let this channel fade like an echo in the night. Become part of our pack. Hit that subscribe button right now. Ring that notification bell so you never miss another journey into the shadows. Every single subscription is more than just a click. It's fuel. It's the silver that lets us fight the silence and bring more legends, more heroes, more heart-stopping tales like Clay's out into the light. Don't just be a spectator. Be the reason these stories live on. Subscribe. Help us grow. Thank you.